I'm Mason Parker. I'm 28 years old, and my own father tried to destroy my life's work with a bulldozer. Before I tell you how a dusty, forgotten cassette tape from my dead grandmother blew up my family in a court of law, let me know where you're watching from in the comments below. It all happened on a Thursday afternoon. The kind of perfect, late summer day where the air smells like cut grass and warm earth. I was at my last delivery stop, a farm-to-table bistro in town, feeling good. My business, Fresh Roots Farm, was finally thriving. I was tired. My muscles ached in that satisfying way they do after a long day of honest work. And I was happy. Then my phone buzzed. It was my neighbor, Walter. Mason. His voice was thin and tight with panic. You need to get home. Right now. My stomach dropped. Walter wasn't a man who panicked. What is it? What's wrong? It's your father, son. He's here with a bulldozer. The words didn't make sense. A bulldozer? My dad, Robert Parker, was a man who lived in tailored suits and leather shoes. A man who thought a smudge on his tie was a crisis. The image was so absurd. I thought Walter had to be mistaken. Walter? What are you talking about? I'm not kidding. He's tearing everything up. The vegetable beds, the greenhouses. I've already called the cops. But you need to get here now. I didn't wait to hear more. I threw the phone onto the passenger seat and peeled out of the parking lot, my old pickup truck groaning in protest. The 15-minute drive home felt like an eternity. My mind was a whirlwind of denial and dread. It had to be a mistake. A horrible, crazy mistake. I heard it before I saw it. A deep, grinding roar that drowned out the peaceful hum of the countryside. It was a sound of violence, of metal chewing through earth. As I turned onto the long gravel driveway leading to my farmhouse, the scene came into view, and it stole the breath from my lungs. A massive, bright yellow bulldozer was carving a path of destruction right through the heart of my farm. It looked like a mechanical monster unleashed in my own personal Eden. And sitting in the driver's seat, his face red and twisted with a kind of manic fury, was my father. He was systematically plowing through the heirloom tomato vines I'd spent months nurturing. The gnarled gash he left in the rich, dark soil looked like a wound. Dad! Stop! What are you doing? I screamed, leaping from my truck before it even came to a complete stop. He turned his head, his eyes wild. He didn't seem to recognize me. He just saw an obstacle. He pulled a lever, and the giant metal bucket of the machine crashed down on my main greenhouse, the one I had built with my own 2 hands. The sound of shattering glass and twisting metal was sickening. I sprinted towards him, my feet sinking into the soil he had just desecrated. Stop it! That's when he bellowed at me, his voice raw with rage, loud enough to be heard over the engine's roar. This land belongs to your brother now. At that moment, 2 police cruisers came barreling down the driveway, lights flashing. The officers jumped out, their faces a mixture of shock and disbelief. Sir, get out of the machine. Hands in the air, one of them commanded. My father cut the engine. The sudden silence was deafening, broken only by the chirping of birds that seemed oblivious to the carnage. He slowly raised his hands, a strange, triumphant sneer on his face. I stood frozen, surveying the wreckage. My farm, my sanctuary, my dream, my grandmother's legacy, was in ruins. And the man who had done it, the man with the sneer on his face, was my own father. I looked past him, at the old oak tree near the edge of the property. A deep, fresh scar gouged into its ancient bark. And suddenly I wasn't 28 anymore. I was a little boy, standing under that same tree, listening to my grandmother's gentle voice. My grandmother, Elaine Parker, always used to say that soil has a memory. It remembers who cares for it, and who hurts it, she'd tell me, her hands covered in dirt as she showed me how to gently loosen the roots of a sapling. While my parents, Robert and Karen, were busy climbing corporate ladders in the city, escaping their rural roots like it was a disease, I spent every possible moment at my grandma's farm. For them, success was measured in stock portfolios and job titles. For Grandma Elaine, it was measured in the sweetness of a sun-ripened strawberry and the earthy scent of rain on dry soil. She was my real parent in all the ways that mattered. She taught me about companion planting, how basil could protect tomatoes from pests. She taught me the quiet patience of waiting for a seed to sprout. She taught me that real wealth wasn't something you could count, but something you could grow. My parents never understood. They'd look at my dirt-stained jeans and muddy boots with a kind of polite disgust when I'd come home after a weekend at the farm. Family dinners were tense, quiet affairs in their sterile, minimalist dining room. The conversation always revolved around my older brother, Jason. Jason made the dean's list again. My father would announce, beaming with pride, "He's got an internship lined up with a top firm in California. That's my boy." "Oh, that's wonderful, honey." My mother would chime in, her eyes sparkling. "A real career. Something stable and respectable." Then all eyes would turn to me. "And what about you, Mason?" My mother would ask, her tone dripping with faux concern. "Still playing in the mud with Grandma?" "I'm not playing, Mom. I'm learning," I'd say quietly. My father would let out a short, humorless laugh. "Learning what?" "How to get your hands dirty. The world doesn't pay for dirty hands, son. It pays for sharp minds and clean suits." Jason would just sit there, a smug little smirk on his face. He was the golden child, the one following their perfect blueprint for life. With my love for the earth, was the weird, disappointing detour. 3 years ago, Grandma Elaine passed away. The whole family gathered in the office of her longtime lawyer, Thomas Wilson, for the reading of the will. My parents and Jason sat on one side of the mahogany desk, looking somber and important in their expensive black clothes. I sat on the other side, feeling out of place. Everyone assumed the 5-acre farm would be split between me and Jason. It was the fair thing to do. Mr. Wilson, a kind man with sharp eyes, cleared his throat and began to read. After a few minor bequests, he got to the main asset. Regarding the entire real property, including the farmhouse, all outbuildings, and the 5 acres of land located at 145 Old Mill Road, along with the associated trust fund for its upkeep, I bequeath it in its entirety to my beloved grandson, Mason Parker. The silence that fell over the room was so thick I could feel it pressing in on me. I looked up, stunned. The whole thing? To me? Jason's face went from pale to a deep, blotchy red. My mother's perfectly made-up face slackened in shock. My father's jaw was clenched so tight I could see a muscle twitching in his cheek. Mr. Wilson continued, his voice steady. Grandma Elaine left a personal note. It reads, "For my dearest Mason, who understands the true value of this land and will honor its purpose. Take care of it, son." My father was the first to recover, pasting on a tight, artificial smile. "Well, Mom always had a strange sense of humor. I assume, Mason, that you'll do the right thing and sell it, splitting the money evenly with your brother." It wasn't a question. It was an order. I didn't answer him. Couldn't. I just felt the immense weight of my grandmother's trust settling on my shoulders. 2 weeks later, I quit my dead-end marketing job, packed up my small apartment, and moved into my grandmother's rustic farmhouse. That first year was brutal. I was fueled by grief and determination, but I was in way over my head. A late frost killed my first batch of seedlings. I took out a loan that kept me awake at night. There were days I was so exhausted I'd fall asleep at the dinner table, covered in mud and sweat. But I wasn't alone. Walter, my neighbor, a man who had known me since I was a boy, showed me how to fix the old tractor. He'd show up with a thermos of coffee in the morning and quiet advice. "Your grandma would be so proud of you, kid," he'd say, and that was enough to keep me going. The breakthrough came one sweltering afternoon in my second summer. I loaded up a crate with my best produce and, on a whim, walked into the Gilded Spoon, the fanciest restaurant in town. The head chef, a notoriously grumpy Frenchman named Antoine Dubois, looked at my offering with disdain. "I have suppliers from all over the country," he said, his arms crossed. "Just taste one," I said, holding out a single, perfectly ripe heirloom tomato that shone like a ruby in the sunlight. He took it, skeptical. He bit into it, His eyes widened. A slow smile spread across his face. "Mon Dieu," he whispered. "It tastes like sunshine." That was the beginning. Fresh Roots Farm started to get a reputation. Other restaurants called. I built a loyal following at the local farmers market. I expanded the orchards, installed a drip irrigation system, and built new greenhouses. The farm wasn't just a business anymore. It was alive. It was a testament to everything my grandmother had taught me. For 2 years, my family kept their distance. They sent polite, generic Christmas cards. They made short, awkward phone calls. I knew they were just waiting for me to fail. But I didn't. I was succeeding. And my success was a problem they couldn't ignore. It was a direct challenge to their entire value system. And that, I would soon learn, was something they could not tolerate. The quiet resentment was about to turn into open warfare. The storm arrived in the form of my brother, Jason. His much-hyped marketing agency in California had imploded, leaving him bankrupt and drowning in debt. At 32 years old, the golden child came slinking back home to live in his old bedroom in our parents' house. His return shifted the entire dynamic of the family. The quiet disapproval I'd grown used to was replaced by a more active, insidious pressure. It started with casual comments during the rare Sunday dinners I forced myself to attend. "You know, that land has incredible real estate potential," Jason would say, swirling his wine. "You could build a few luxury eco-homes, make a fortune." Then Jason started dating Bradley. Bradley was a slick, handsome real estate developer with a smile that never quite reached his eyes. The first time he visited the farm, I felt a chill run down my spine. He didn't see the rows of kale or the blossoming apple trees. He saw parcels of land. He didn't admire the restored barn. He mentally calculated its demolition cost. "Incredible space," Bradley said, his eyes scanning the property with a predatory gleam. "So much untapped potential." My parents quickly fell under his spell and began echoing his sentiments. "You're just one person, Mason?" my mother said to me one afternoon over the phone, her voice laced with that familiar, cloying concern. "It's too much land for a single man to manage. You should let Jason and Bradley help you. They have vision." The pressure intensified. One night, Walter called me, his voice low. "Hey, Mason. There was a car parked down by your main irrigation line for a while. Drove off when I came out. Looked suspicious. I went out to check. The anonymous car was gone, but the damage was done. A crucial valve had been tampered with, loosened just enough to cause a slow, steady leak. A whole section of my new tomato crop was flooded. It wasn't an accident. It was a message." The next day, I spent $1,000 I didn't really have installing 3 new security cameras. Things came to a head at Jason and Bradley's engagement party. It was a lavish affair at my parents' home, filled with their wealthy, superficial friends. I stood in a corner, feeling like an alien, when I overheard Bradley talking to one of my father's golf buddies. "We're looking to build in the area," Bradley boasted, a champagne flute in his hand. "Something exclusive, sustainable luxury living. We've got our eye on a particular piece of land. The crown jewel of the project, really." His eyes flickered across the room and landed on me. My blood ran cold. A few weeks later, I was summoned to a family brunch. I knew it was a trap. The moment I walked in, the air was thick with tension. As soon as the plates were cleared, my father slid a thick, glossy brochure across the table. The cover read, "Windermere Estates." Below the title was a sleek, architectural rendering of modern glass and steel homes sitting exactly where my farm was. My heart hammered against my ribs as I flipped through the pages. Detailed floor plans, projected profits, artists' renderings of a community pool where my orchard now stood. They had planned the murder of my farm in excruciating detail. "We're not asking for everything," my mother said softly, as if she were offering a generous compromise. "Just 3 acres. You can keep the farmhouse and 2 acres for your hobby. Jason and Bradley need a fresh start, Mason. Family helps family." "Bradley has an investor lined up," Jason chimed in, his voice high with excitement. But it's contingent on securing the main parcel. This is a life-changing opportunity, Mason. For me. For us. I looked from one expectant face to the next. My father, with the cold, hard expression of a CEO closing a deal. My mother, with her expertly crafted look of loving concern. My brother, his eyes glittering with a desperate greed. They weren't seeing me. They were seeing a problem that needed to be solved. I pushed the brochure back towards the center of the table. No, I said. My voice was quiet, but it cut through the silence like a knife. What? Jason sputtered. Mason, don't be difficult. My mother sighed. My father's face hardened into a granite mask. You don't seem to understand. This isn't a request. This is what's happening. This is my land, I said, standing up. My hands were shaking, but my voice was steady. Grandma gave it to me. I'm not selling a single inch. I'm not letting you pave over her legacy for another one of your soulless projects. I looked directly at my father. And you revealed the real reason for all this. It's not about helping Jason with a new start. It's about bailing him out of a massive debt and saving your own house from foreclosure. The color drained from my mother's face. Jason looked like I'd slapped him. My father stood up slowly, his eyes narrowing into dangerous slits. The air crackled. You ungrateful little brat, he hissed. We gave you everything. You gave Jason everything. I corrected him. You gave me criticism and doubt. Grandma gave me a chance. I'm honoring her, not your bad investments. The silence that followed was terrifying. Finally, my father spoke, his voice low and menacing. Fine, have it your way. But if you refuse to help your family, don't expect this family to be there for you when your pathetic little farming experiment fails. You're on your own. I walked out of that house knowing it was a declaration of war. I just didn't realize how literal they meant it to be. Walking away from my parents' house that day, I was done with illusions. My father's threat wasn't the empty blustering of an angry man. It was a promise. I couldn't just wait for the other shoe to drop. Passivity, I realized, was a form of suicide. I had to fight back. The very next morning, I was sitting in Thomas Wilson's office. The familiar smell of old books and lemon polish usually calmed me. But today, my nerves were frayed. I told him everything. The return of my brother, the appearance of Bradley, the sabotaged irrigation line, and finally, the brunch ambush with the Windermere Estates brochure. I told him about the real reason they were so desperate. Jason's massive debt and the threat of foreclosure on my parents' home. Mr. Wilson listened patiently, his fingertips steepled under his chin. When I finished, he was quiet for a long moment, his sharp eyes studying my face. Your grandmother, he said finally, his voice soft but firm. She foresaw this. Not the specifics, perhaps, but she understood their nature. She knew their greed and their desperation. They won't stop, Mr. Wilson, I said, my voice tight. I can feel it. I believe you're right, he nodded. Desperate men do desperate things. We can't just be on the defensive, Mason. We have to be proactive. What do we do? I want you to search. Everything. Your grandmother was a meticulous woman. She kept records of everything. Go through all of her old papers, her ledgers, the boxes you stored in the attic. Look for anything that shows a pattern of behavior, any evidence of their past intentions. I will begin drafting a request for a restraining order, but we need a rock-solid foundation. That night, I climbed the creaky stairs to the attic. Under the light of a single bare bulb, I started opening the cardboard boxes that held the archive of my grandmother's life. I worked for hours, sifting through old photographs, letters, and receipts. Then, in a box marked old farm papers, I found them. A stack of old, leather-bound journals, tied together with twine. I carried them downstairs, my heart beating a little faster. I began to read. Her elegant cursive filled the pages. I read about seasons of bounty and seasons of drought, about her joy at my birth and her sorrow at my grandfather's passing. Then I came to a series of entries from about 15 years ago. October 12th, Robert and Karen visited today. They spoke of a new investment opportunity. It sounds too good to be true. I do not trust things that come too easily. Robert has that look in his eye, the same one his father had right before making a terrible decision. October 25th, they came again. This time they asked for a significant loan. I refused. This farm is not a bank. Robert was furious. He said I didn't trust my own son. I did not say it, but it is true. I do not trust his greed. And then, the entry that made me stop breathing. November 5th, I cannot believe it. Thomas just called. He discovered that Robert had attempted to use the farm as collateral for his loan. He had forged my signature on preliminary documents. Thomas stopped it in time. My heart is broken. The son I raised tried to steal his family's legacy from behind my back. As of today, everything changes. I must protect this land from my own blood. A cold dread washed over me. This was it. This was the reason. It wasn't favoritism. It was protection. My hands trembling with adrenaline, I dug deeper into the box. At the very bottom, I found something else. An old cassette tape, the kind people used in handheld recorders in the 90s. On the label, in my grandmother's familiar handwriting, were 2 letters and a date. RP call October 08. RP Robert Parker. It took me half the next day to find a working cassette player at a thrift store. I brought it home, my hands shaking as I carefully inserted the tape. I pushed the play button. After a long, staticky hiss, a voice emerged. My grandmother's voice, sharp and clear. I can't believe you did it, Robert. Then my father's voice, younger, defensive. Mom, I was just trying. It was a good opportunity. A good opportunity? You call trying to mortgage my home behind my back a good opportunity? You call forging my signature a good opportunity? Her voice trembled with rage. I would have paid it back. I knew I could. It's not about the money, Robert. It's about trust. And you have shattered it. Utterly. Don't you ever think about touching this land again. Do you understand me? There was a long pause. Then, my father's voice, bitter and resentful. Whatever, Mom. It's just a patch of dirt anyway. The sound of a phone being slammed down. Click. I hit the stop button. I sat there in the quiet of the farmhouse, the cassette tape feeling heavy in my hand, like a weapon. I had it, the undeniable proof. This wasn't a gift from heaven. This was something I had earned, guided by my grandmother's memory. I wasn't on the defensive anymore. I was ready to fight. Thomas Wilson moved fast. A formal letter was dispatched to my father's lawyer. It was a masterfully worded warning shot. It stated that I was aware of the ongoing harassment and was preparing to file for a permanent restraining order, citing a history of bad faith and prior attempts to fraudulently secure the property. It didn't mention the cassette tape specifically, referring only to undeniable documentary and audio evidence. It was a calculated move designed to flush them out. It worked, but in a way that was more violent and catastrophic than I could have ever imagined. For my father, that letter was a death sentence. The past he had buried was about to be exhumed. His desperation curdled into pure panic. Bradley's grand plans, Jason's debts, his own home, everything was about to go up in smoke. In his twisted, cornered mind, a single, insane idea took root. If he couldn't have the land, no one could. If the farm was destroyed, it would be worthless. The fight would be over. And so, on that fateful Thursday afternoon, my father rented a bulldozer. It was the final, desperate act of a man who had lost all control. The court hearing took place 3 weeks later. The small courtroom was packed. News of a local businessman bulldozing his own son's farm had spread like wildfire. I sat beside Thomas Wilson, feeling a strange, cold calm. Across the aisle, my father, mother, and Jason sat huddled together, looking pale and drawn. Bradley was there, too, lurking in the back row, his usual confident smirk replaced by a nervous pallor. Their lawyer, a slick young man in an expensive suit, tried to paint a picture of a tragic family misunderstanding. My client, Mr. Robert Parker, He began in a sympathetic tone, acted out of a state of extreme emotional distress. He was a heartbroken father, devastated that his own son would refuse to help his family in their time of greatest need. This was not an act of malice, Your Honor. It was a desperate cry for help. Then it was Mr. Wilson's turn. He didn't use flowery language. He presented the facts, methodically and relentlessly. He showed the photos of the destruction, the official damage estimate of over $100,000. He called Walter to the stand, who recounted what he saw. He called Chef Antoine, who testified to the economic value and community importance of Fresh Roots Farm. The defense claims this was an impulsive act, Mr. Wilson said, his voice resonating through the courtroom. We are here to prove that this was, in fact, the culmination of a multi-year conspiracy, fueled by greed and a flagrant disregard for the last will and testament of the deceased. He presented the pages from my grandmother's journal, reading aloud the entries about my parents' attempts to get money from her, and their scheme to mortgage the farm. The air in the room grew thick with tension. My father's lawyer jumped to his feet. Objection, Your Honor. These are the subjective writings of a person who is no longer with us. They prove nothing. Objection noted, but I'll allow it, the judge said, his eyes fixed on my father. And finally, Mr. Wilson announced, we have evidence that comes from the defendant's own mouth. He placed the old cassette player on the court clerk's desk. A ripple of murmurs went through the room. Mr. Wilson hit the play button. The hiss of the old tape filled the silent courtroom. Then my grandmother's voice, clear as a bell. I can't believe you did it, Robert. The color drained from my father's face. He looked like he'd seen a ghost. My mother gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. Jason stared at the floor, his whole body trembling. Then came my father's voice from the past, weak and guilty. Mom, I was just trying. The conversation played out, every word from my grandmother a hammer blow to my father's defense. Then came the final, damning line, dripping with his own youthful arrogance and resentment. Whatever, Mom. It's just a patch of dirt anyway. Mr. Wilson hit the stop button. He turned slowly and looked directly at my father. Mr. Parker, he asked, his voice deceptively gentle. Was that your voice on the recording? Do you still believe that your son's home, his business, his grandmother's legacy, is just a patch of dirt? My father didn't answer. He couldn't. He just sat there, a broken man, and buried his face in his hands. The lies had run out. The truth, raw and ugly, was laid bare for everyone to see. I didn't feel a sense of triumph. I didn't feel joy. I just felt a profound, bottomless sadness. The war was over. I had won. But the cost was the final, complete demolition of what was once my family. The judge's verdict was swift and severe. He was a stern, no-nonsense man, and he looked down at my father from the bench with undisguised contempt. The actions of the defendant, Robert Parker, he declared, his voice booming in the silent courtroom, were not a cry for help. They were a calculated, selfish, and malicious act of destruction, born from a long history of greed and bad faith. This court cannot and will not tolerate such a brazen assault on another person's property and livelihood, especially when perpetrated by a parent against their own child. My father was found guilty of felony destruction of property. Given the premeditated nature of the crime, proven by the evidence I had uncovered, he was sentenced to 2 years in state prison. There would be no suspended sentence, no simple community service. The home my parents had fought so desperately to save was seized to help pay for Jason's debts, and the court ordered restitution to me. A permanent restraining order was granted against all 3 of them, my father, my mother, and my brother. Justice, at least in the eyes of the law, had been served. As Mr. Wilson and I left the courthouse, a small group of local reporters swarmed us. I kept my head down and walked straight to my truck, letting him handle the questions. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw my family being escorted out a side door by their lawyer, looking like ghosts in the harsh afternoon light. I felt nothing, not hatred, not pity, just a vast, cold emptiness. A week later, my phone rang. It was Jason. The restraining order didn't apply to phone calls, but I had no reason to answer. Yet some morbid curiosity made me pick up. "Can I see you?" His voice was a hoarse whisper. "Just for 10 minutes. The diner off the highway. Please." Against my better judgment, I agreed. I think I needed to see the wreckage up close one last time. The diner was a greasy, run-down place that smelled of stale coffee. Jason was huddled in a booth in the back corner. He looked like he'd aged 10 years. His designer clothes hung off his now thin frame. He was nervously stirring a cup of black coffee he hadn't touched. "Thanks for coming," he said, not meeting my eyes. I just nodded, waiting. I messed up," he mumbled, staring into his cup. "I screwed everything up, Mason. I trusted Bradley. He set up the loans, introduced me to those sharks. He said getting the land was the only way out. He said it was a sure thing." He let out a dry, rattling laugh. "Now he's gone. Vanished. The investors were never real. It was all a scam to get his hands on the farm." "That's not my problem," I said, my voice flat. "I know," he said quickly, finally looking up. His eyes were red-rimmed and desperate. "I know it's not. I needed you to know. At first, I didn't want this. I was just jealous. I was so jealous of you, Mason. You had something real. Something you loved. All I had were numbers in a bank account that weren't even mine and praise from Mom and Dad that I knew I didn't deserve." Tears started to well up in his eyes. "I'm sorry, Mason, for everything." I looked at my brother, this broken, pathetic man who had been my tormentor and my rival for my entire life. The anger I had held onto for so long was gone. In its place was something else, something I couldn't quite name. It wasn't forgiveness. It was release. I saw him for what he was. A weak man who had been propped up his whole life and had crumbled at the first sign of real pressure. "It's too late for sorry, Jason," I said, and for the first time I think he truly understood. I stood up from the booth. "Goodbye." As I walked out of the diner and into the clean, fresh air, I knew that chapter of my life was well and truly over. I was free. Rebuilding was harder than I expected, and easier at the same time. The physical work was immense. The emotional toll was heavier. For weeks, I'd wake up with a jolt, the phantom roar of the bulldozer still ringing in my ears. But I wasn't alone. The day after the sentencing, Walter showed up at dawn with his tractor and a thermos of hot coffee. "Let's get to work, son," was all he said. That afternoon, Chef Antoine's truck pulled into my driveway. He got out, handed me an envelope, and gave my shoulder a firm squeeze. "A prepayment for the next 2 seasons," he said. "I know you will deliver." Inside the envelope was a check so large it made my eyes water. Word had spread through the local farming community. People I barely knew dropped off trays of seedlings. The owner of the hardware store gave me a deep discount on building materials. A group of agricultural students from the local college volunteered their weekends to help me clear the debris and redesign the layout of the gardens. My farm, which my own family had tried to destroy, was being brought back to life by the kindness of strangers and friends. It was a humbling and powerful lesson. I decided not to erase all the scars. Where the main greenhouse had been crushed, I built something new. It wasn't another greenhouse. I cleared the twisted metal and shattered glass, but I left the original concrete foundation. Inside that footprint, I planted a memorial garden, filled with my grandmother's favorite flowers: lavender, echinacea, and big, bushy hydrangeas. In the center, I placed a simple wooden bench. It became the quiet heart of the new farm, a place to remember, a testament that even from wreckage, beauty could grow. The farm didn't just recover. It thrived. With the community's investment and support, I was able to build bigger, better, and smarter. I expanded my community-supported agriculture, CSA, program. I started hosting small workshops on sustainable farming. Fresh Roots Farm became more than just a business. It became the community hub I had always dreamed it could be. A year after the attack, I stood on a small stage at the local community college. I was there to announce the first recipient of the Elaine Parker Legacy Scholarship, a fund I had established to support a student who demonstrated a commitment to sustainable agriculture. As I looked out at the crowd, my eyes landed on a young man standing nervously in the back. His name was Leo. He was the student my brother had bribed to sabotage my irrigation system all that time ago. I had found out later that Jason had paid him $500, a fortune for a struggling student, to do it. After the court case, Leo had sought me out. He had confessed everything, crying, and offered to work for free to pay me back. I had refused, telling him to just focus on his studies. I hadn't seen him since. I finished my speech and then I called his name. The first recipient of the Elaine Parker Legacy Scholarship is Leo Martinez. A stunned silence fell over the room. Leo froze, his eyes wide with disbelief. He looked at me, confused. I just nodded at him. He walked to the stage as if in a daze and took the certificate from my hand. "Why?" he whispered, his voice choked with emotion. "My grandmother believed in second chances," I told him quietly. "The land does too. Takes what's broken and finds a way to grow again. The only question is, do you?" He couldn't speak. He just stood there, tears streaming down his face, clutching the certificate that represented a future he thought he had thrown away. In that moment, I felt the last bit of bitterness I was holding on to finally dissolve. My family had tried to teach me that the world was about taking, about winning at all costs. But my grandmother, and the community that had rallied around me, had taught me something different. The greatest strength wasn't in holding a grudge, but in planting a seed, in giving someone else the chance to grow. It's been another year since that day. The farm is more abundant than ever. The scarred old oak tree has a new ring of healthy bark growing around its wound. The memorial garden is a riot of purple and white, a favorite spot for bees and butterflies. Sometimes, in the quiet of the evening, I sit on that bench and just listen. I listen to the wind in the leaves, the hum of the earth settling down for the night. I think about my journey. I think about the anger, the betrayal, and the profound sadness. Those feelings are part of my story, scars on my own heart, just like the ones on the land. But they are not the whole story. My father is still in prison. My mother moved to another state to live with a sister. I haven't heard from either of them. Jason, I heard, is working a low-level job somewhere, trying to pay off his debts. They are ghosts from another life. My grandmother's real gift wasn't the land itself. It was the strength she knew I had inside me to protect it. She gave me a legacy, but the fighting to keep it gave me myself. I learned that boundaries aren't selfish. They are necessary for survival. I learned that community is the richest soil you can ever have. And I learned that true success isn't about what you own, but about what you nurture and what you build. The farm that was almost destroyed now flourishes with more life and purpose than ever before. The scars are still visible if you look closely, but they're not just reminders of trauma anymore. They are testaments to rebuilding something stronger and more meaningful than what was lost. They are proof that even after the most brutal storm, a new day dawns, and there is always a chance to grow again. That letter was the spark that lit the fuse. My father, already teetering on the edge of financial ruin and now facing public humiliation, panicked. He knew exactly what audio recording we had. In his mind, the chess game was over. His only remaining move was to flip the board. If he couldn't have the farm, he would destroy it. And that's what led him to rent a bulldozer. The courtroom 3 weeks later felt like a theater. Every seat was filled with curious townspeople. I sat beside Mr. Wilson, my hands clasped tightly in my lap to keep them from shaking. Across the aisle, my family looked like a trio of pale, haggard ghosts. Their lawyer argued passionately that my father had suffered a momentary breakdown, a paternal cry for help, brought on by my callous indifference to the family's plight. He tried to paint me as a selfish, ungrateful son. When it was our turn, Mr. Wilson calmly began to dismantle their narrative, piece by piece. He presented the damage reports, the photos, the testimony from Walter. He established the farm's value not just in dollars, but in its importance to the community. Then he moved in for the kill. The defense would have you believe this was a singular emotional outburst, Mr. Wilson said, his voice filling the room. We will now demonstrate that it was, in fact, the desperate conclusion to a 15-year-long campaign of greed. He submitted the journal entries as evidence. My father's lawyer objected vehemently, but the judge, his interest clearly piqued, allowed it. The mood in the room shifted. You could feel the tide turning. And now, Your Honor, Mr. Wilson said, turning to the clerk, I would like to play an audio recording. He placed the old boombox on the clerk's table. You could have heard a pin drop. He pressed the play button. The scratchy hiss filled the courtroom, and then my grandmother's voice, strong and clear, echoed from beyond the grave. I can't believe you had the audacity, Robert. My father went rigid. My mother let out a small, strangled gasp. Jason sank lower in his chair, as if trying to disappear into the floor. The entire courtroom listened, spellbound, as the ugly 15-year-old conversation played out. They heard my father's weak excuses. They heard my grandmother's righteous fury. And finally, they heard his own voice, dripping with youthful contempt, dismiss his entire family legacy as just a patch of dirt anyway. When the tape ended, the silence was absolute. Mr. Wilson walked slowly towards the defendant's table. He looked directly at my father. Mr. Parker, he asked, his voice quiet but carrying to every corner of the room. Do you deny that was your voice on that recording? My father stared at him, his mouth opening and closing, but no sound came out. Do you deny that you tried to steal this land from your own mother 15 years ago? Silence. And do you still believe, Mr. Parker, after everything, that my client's home, his livelihood, and your mother's legacy is just a patch of dirt? My father finally broke. A terrible, guttural sob escaped his lips, and he slumped forward, burying his face in his hands. The performance was over. The powerful businessman was gone. In his place was just a guilty, broken man, exposed for all the world to see. I felt no victory, only a hollow, aching sadness for the family I once had and would never have again. The truth had finally come out, and it had burned everything to the ground. The judge delivered his sentence without a hint of sympathy. His words were like hammer blows. Mr. Parker, this was not a cry for help. It was a calculated act of violence against your own son, he said, his gaze like steel. Your history shows a pattern of greed that this court finds reprehensible. This was not a momentary lapse. It was the culmination of your character. My father was sentenced to 2 years in state prison. No probation, no house arrest. The courtroom gasped. My mother let out a faint cry. For his part, my father just looked empty, a hollowed-out shell of the man he used to be. The family home was promptly put up for sale by the bank to cover the restitution and Jason's debts. The empire my parents had spent their lives building had crumbled into dust in a single afternoon. Walking out of the courthouse, I felt a strange sense of dislocation. It was over, but it didn't feel like a victory. Mr. Wilson put a firm hand on my shoulder. You did the right thing, Mason. You honored your grandmother. A week later, I got a call from a number I didn't recognize. It was Jason. His voice was thin and reedy, all the old arrogance gone. He asked if I would meet him. I don't know why I said yes. Maybe I needed to see the final piece of wreckage for myself. We met at a dingy roadside diner. He looked terrible. He was thin, his expensive clothes looked cheap and rumpled, and his eyes were hollow. I know you don't want to hear it, he started, staring into a mug of cold coffee. But I'm sorry. I just waited. It was Bradley, he said, his voice barely a whisper. He had me so twisted up in debt. In these deals I didn't understand. He kept saying the farm was the only way out. The golden ticket. He pushed me to pressure Mom and Dad. He was the one who suggested I mess with your irrigation that night. Just to rattle you, he said. He finally looked at me, and his face was crumpled with a self-pity that was almost unbearable to watch. He played us all, Mason. The moment Dad was arrested, he vanished. the investors, the plans. All of it was smoke. He was just using me to get his hands on the land. And I was stupid enough to let him. I looked at my brother, the golden child, now just a sad, broken man. For my entire life, I had either feared him or resented him. Now, for the first time, I just felt pity. He was a house built without a foundation, and he had finally collapsed under his own weight. "Goodbye, Jason," I said, standing up. It was all that was left to say. I walked out of that diner and didn't look back. I felt the last toxic tie to my old life finally snap. I was on my own, standing in the ruins, but for the first time I felt truly free. Rebuilding the farm was the hardest work I've ever done. Some days, the scope of the destruction felt overwhelming. But this time, I wasn't doing it alone. The community that had sustained my business now rallied to rebuild my life. Walter was there the very next morning, his old tractor rumbling to life, ready to help me clear the debris. Chef Antoine showed up, not with an order, but with a crew from his restaurant, and they spent a whole Saturday helping me rebuild the frames for new greenhouses. He also handed me a thick envelope. "A deposit," he said, "for all the beautiful food you are going to grow next season." Other local farmers, people who were technically my competition, dropped off flats of seedlings and bags of compost. "We're all in this together, son," one of them told me, clapping me on the shoulder. Their kindness was a balm on a very raw wound. It taught me a lesson my own family never could. That community is a currency more valuable than money. I decided to transform the site of the most painful destruction into a place of beauty. Where my main greenhouse had been crushed, I left the concrete foundation as a scar and a reminder. Inside its perimeter, I planted a memorial garden for my grandmother. I filled it with her favorites: billowing lavender, sturdy echinacea, and fragrant climbing roses that would eventually cover a new trellis. It became the heart of the farm, a quiet place to sit and remember that life always finds a way. The farm grew back stronger, more vibrant, and more purposeful than before. I expanded my CSA program, started a small on-site farm stand, and began hosting workshops on weekends, teaching people in the community how to grow their own food. The farm wasn't just my business anymore. It was theirs too. A year after the verdict, I stood at a podium at the local community college. I had used some of the restitution money to create the Elaine Parker Legacy Scholarship to support a student in the agricultural program. As I scanned the audience, I saw a familiar face in the back of the room. Leo, the young student who Jason had paid to sabotage my irrigation pipe. He had come to me after the trial, full of shame and apologies. I had told him then just to focus on his education and be better. I finished my speech about my grandmother's belief in the resilience of the land. Then I announced the scholarship's first recipient. This year's scholarship is awarded to a student who has shown not only great promise, but also great courage in facing his mistakes and committing to a better path. Please join me in congratulating Leo Martinez. A ripple of surprise went through the crowd. Leo himself looked utterly stunned. He walked to the stage in a daze, his eyes wide. As I handed him the certificate, he whispered, "But why? After what I did?" I looked at him, and for the first time, I saw not a betrayer, but just a kid who had made a stupid, desperate mistake. "My grandmother taught me that good soil can turn rot into nourishment," I said quietly, for his ears only. "She believed in second chances. I do too. Don't waste this one." Tears streamed down his face as he clutched the certificate. In that moment of forgiveness, I felt the last shadow of my family's betrayal finally lift. I was no longer defined by their cruelty. I was being defined by my own choices, by the legacy of kindness I was choosing to build. It's been a few years now. The farm is a testament to resilience. The scarred oak tree is healthier than ever, its branches reaching defiantly for the sky. The memorial garden is a riot of color and life, constantly buzzing with bees and hummingbirds. It's my favorite place to sit in the quiet of the evening, when the sun dips below the hills and paints the sky in shades of orange and purple. I think about my family sometimes, but they feel like characters from a book I read a long time ago. My father served his time and was released. I hear he lives in a small apartment a few states away. Quiet, anonymous man. My mother never tried to contact me again. And Jason, I heard he's working a simple job, paying his debts, living a life stripped of all the pretense he once held so dear. They are no longer the monsters in my story. They are just sad, cautionary tales. My grandmother's real gift to me wasn't the 5 acres of land. It was the love of the land. She gave me roots, but the fight to protect them forced me to grow. I learned that your real family isn't always the one you're born into, but the one you build around you through shared work, respect, and kindness. I learned that boundaries are a form of self-respect. And I learned that true wealth has nothing to do with a bank statement and everything to do with the richness of the soil under your fingernails and the loyalty of the community at your back. The farm that was nearly erased is now more alive than ever. The scars are still there, a permanent part of the landscape. But they no longer represent pain. They represent the strength it takes to heal, to regrow, to build something more beautiful and more meaningful on the very site of your deepest wound. Thank you for listening to my story. I hope it resonated with you in some way. Have you ever had to fight for something you truly believed in, even against the people you were supposed to trust the most? Please share your story in the comments below, and don't forget to like and subscribe so you don't miss what's next.